Hi, and welcome to Liberty, Literacy, and Legacy. I'm Christina Bogus. Our show is where we examine education as it actually functions, not as it is marketed, and not as it is summarized in press releases and oh, so often softened in board meetings. But we examine it as a structural force shaping a nation because liberty does not survive without literacy, literacy does not endure without virtue, and legacy is never accidental. It is intentionally built. We analyze policy, constitutional law, curriculum, culture, faith, family, and the future of the American classroom. Because if education shapes a nation, and it does, then this conversation is not optional. Today we have with us Cari Bartholomew from Be Not Afraid. Welcome, Cari.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited that you're here. Tonight we're going to talk about gaslighting, and if it's okay with you, Cari, I'm going to set the stage. Is that all right?
Sure, yes.
So we're going to show you a little video.
It was written 2 days before she was murdered.
He said I wasn't any liquor. He said I was going out of my mind.
You're not going out of your mind. You're slowly and systematically being driven out of your mind.
Why? Why?
So let's talk about the clinical definition of gaslighting. And gaslighting is a psychological manipulation tactic in which a person or institution denies observable reality to make other question their perception, their memory, or their judgment. And as you just saw in the 1938 play Gaslight and subsequent film adaptation, a husband dims lights and insists his wife is imagining it. So the core mechanism of gaslighting is to deny the observable, to reframe dissent as instability, to claim some sort of moral superiority, and to repeat the process until the doubt replaces clarity. So we often see that in schools, we see it in relationships, and we see it oh so often in politics. Today we're talking about the institutional level, and Cari is so great at talking about this in a space that is poignant and forthright, and I love it because I think as we go on, we need to remember that gaslighting is not disagreement in reality, it's the suppression of voice. Cari, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that gaslighting is not simply rhetoric. When I watch that film, it really gives you the ick because you see how much she's being manipulated. And I think
Yep.
that's the word that people need to recognize, is that manipulation is gaslighting. It destabilizes intentionally. It destabilizes trust.
Yes.
It trains people to doubt themselves. They often think, am I crazy? How this couldn't possibly be happening. And especially when somebody jumps in and says, oh, you're crazy, that could never be happening. And in a family, it fractures safety. And in a republic, which we still are, believe it or not, in a
Amen,
republic, it fractures liberty.
Isn't that true? I think that the number one thing we see in politics and in educational institutions today is that framing of that's not happening. And I don't know, it just really it kills me. So let's talk about liberty, because if it fractures liberty, liberty requires three preconditions: objective reality, free speech, and moral agency. And gaslighting actually attacks all three, because if citizens cannot trust what they see, and if dissent is framed as extremism, if questioning policy is labeled as quote unquote misinformation, you absolutely have destroyed civic discourse and you've created narrative enforcement. And in my opinion, gaslighting is authoritarianism's soft opening act, if we can get a little theatrical right there.
I totally agree. And living here in Utah, I feel like gaslighting is just, it is a massive part. Like you don't want to be disruptive, do you? I mean, it's constantly, just constantly I love these words, be a peacekeeper rather than a peacemaker. And I think that's the
Sorry,
biggest part.
only if we only understood the Bible, right? If we could understand the Bible, read it as it was written and understand, it would be so awesome.
Right. So many times people are considered an extremist when they see something right in front of their faces and they say, "Hey, red flag here. This is actually happening."
Uh-huh.
And especially when it is either religious leaders or politicians or both
Mm-hmm.
that come out and say, "You can't possibly question that. I mean, that would never
Yeah.
happen here." You and
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation about protests, right? I believe you
Yeah.
recently just covered that same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it was only a few years ago, that I was saying, the red flag. We're turning our kids into activists,
Yep.
and so many people in my community were like, "I don't know what she's talking about. We would never do that." Well, here we are,
Yep.
right?
Here we are, and it's in our streets, in our schools, and it's absolutely everywhere. In Utah, it's across the nation. I think when we think about gaslighting, you and I've raised concerns about all sorts of things through the years. And what's funny is it's right in front of our face. And yet they'll say, that's not happening. Or I will have people call me as a state board member and they will say, if only you were a teacher, you would know this wasn't true. And we can
Right.
all laugh really loud about that because I am a teacher. And it's so funny to listen to people who berate me that I could only know if I was a teacher. I am sitting in these trainings. Here is my copy of the manual. This is happening because I was there. Would you like to hear the recording? Like there's so many things where they try to get you to question your reality and your sanity, but then they put that on the public and they tell parents that
Yeah.
they're not seeing what they're seeing. So, just some examples like if people want to know, when parents raise concerns about curriculum transparency, they don't trust teachers. Has nothing to do
Right.
with trust. People who raise concerns about sexually explicit or the depiction of graphic sex acts in schools, they're labeled book banners.
They're
When
also they're accused of assault. You're
Oh
literally
yes.
accused of assault if you walk in and say, "Could you explain to me why this is here? I don't think it's appropriate."
Uh-huh.
This book literally says, "Pray the gay away."
Hmm.
Why is this at middle school level? And just to say that, people will say, "Well, we're an inclusive school. We're an inclusive library. Don't you want to be inclusive?" And then it makes you go, "Ooh, those words, they sound so great. Inclusive, welcoming.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be not that."
Hmm.
And that in itself is a way of manipulating you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it makes you question your convictions, your core convictions. And
Yes.
it's important that we keep grounded in our core convictions. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Latter-day Saint, whether you're a member of the Jewish tradition or a Muslim, whatever faith you are, you have to stay grounded in those core convictions. Otherwise, this language will start to force you to question your worldview, which is honestly the point of it. The
Right.
point of it is to attack and to pierce that worldview and to pierce that conviction. And it's genuinely unfortunate. I think another thing, if we can give some more examples, can I give more examples, Carrie?
Yes.
Oh, I think it's hilarious that we're constantly told and we're boasting Utah is the best in the nation at education, yet we continue to see our scores decline. And
Yeah.
there are some buildings that have had some rebounds. I'm not going to lie, but the reality is we are still not over 50% in our proficiency rates, yet we're the best of the best. And that's gaslighting at its finest. Chronic absenteeism has a weird definition, in my opinion, but even under its current definition in our state, chronic absenteeism is going ding, 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 all the way up, yet districts are saying engagement among our students is improving. It's it's really laughable when you can spot it and can work in that space of knowing what's going on and calling people out. I think the public sees a decline when institutions say progress. We see children who are more angry than ever. Obviously, with the last few weeks, they're angry, they're
Yeah.
spiteful. Yet institutions say social and emotional learning is working. Well, I would argue that social and emotional learning is working because it's creating a bunch of angry kids. They would argue that social and emotional learning is creating happy kids, and that's gaslighting, because our children have never been more more sad, more angry, more confused in life.
Well, I would even go as far as miserable. And when you go with what
Yeah.
social and emotional learning is, it
Hmm.
is about tying them into a kind of, well, not even a kind of, a collective consciousness.
Yes.
So that collective consciousness breaks away their individualism. And
Hmm.
so the child who should be thriving, the child who should be very like happy and expressive of themselves. I don't know if you saw the video today, but there are two girls in Washington State beating the living crud out of another girl already. And this is something that personally I have said, this will escalate. This is
Yes.
my problem with this whole mess, is that with kids, it's going to escalate. And we gaslit from the beginning. We had our little restorative justice thing, right? And our
Hmm.
restorative justice,
Yeah.
oh, well, we can't let kids be in trouble because that stresses them out. Okay, so now kids can act to all levels because there are no boundaries.
Hmm.
We created this by allowing ourselves to be gaslit, by allowing ourselves to go, oh, I don't want to be that person.
Hmm.
Then the kind of the lever, it's not the right word. I'm sure you've got the right word, but it moves up and our kids become more and more extreme.
Yes.
And I think that if we're only in the first month and the kids are beating the living crud out of each other,
Hmm.
even if it's not in Utah yet, and I do have stories about some things in Utah, but
Yeah.
even, if it's not, hasn't expanded to that level yet, this is the natural progression, and it's also the planned progression.
Yes. Absolutely. I think that when it comes to gaslighting in that arena, they'll say, "Is it in Utah?" I hear that question a lot. Well, where is that happening here? And
Right.
part of me, has to restrain my, unchristian urge to go because there's so much of that. It's a gaslighting statement. It
Right.
is
The
here.
student-led protest, that's my favorite. You look at these very well
Yeah.
designed posters and they're like,
Hmm.
but this is student-led. And here's the thing, gaslighting as adults is it's pretty hard. I mean, it's abusive. That's why
Yes.
they made a movie about it. Our
Hmm.
kids, you want to know why they're not showing up for school, at least in part? Because they know it. They
Yeah.
they know it. They literally are going, why am I going to school to
Yep.
be manipulated? This
Hmm.
isn't, I like, they
Well, and
know.
why am I going to school when I can't read, but you're spending all this time over
I mean,
here?
maybe it's not even I want to read. Maybe it's just I want purpose for my life. I
Yes.
want purpose for my life, and I can see that you have a very strong agenda for my life.
Yes.
So, um, just on Friday, a parent sent me some information, and it went quite viral.
Where everyone is an immigrant, right?
Everyone's an immigrant,
Yep.
right? There you
Yep.
go. Okay, so the child who sits in the class going, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not. My grandparents freaking settled Utah," right?
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of those kids. And
Hmm.
when they're sitting in a class and they're going, "Well, that's not true." Then they're like, "Well, if they're going to lie to me about that, what are they going to tell me the truth about?"
Exactly. And I think that that is the number one thing, is that when our educators and our institutions and our propaganda that goes out is not truthful.
Yes.
And we see so much of that in this state. We see so much of it in educational institutions, in our political institutions, and in our schools. It damages trust. And once trust is gone, partnership collapses. But every election cycle, you see that parents as partners, and they put it out there. But the reality is that bridge was burned a long time ago, in my opinion, when we started denying what parents saw before their very eyes and tried to tell them it wasn't there. And I
Right.
think we have to have a reality check. And in particular, if we could move into some education for a minute, literacy is measurable, right? And parents have known for years their students struggled with reading. I was one of those parents. I had a young boy who struggled with reading, and we've known for decades, since the dawn of time, right, that phonics-based instruction has strong evidence. We know that balanced literacy has failed struggling readers. We know that reading proficiency is absolutely essential to what is called self-government.
Well,
And
and Christina, I think you're using some big words that maybe your everyday parent wouldn't understand. So I would say
yes,
sight reading has caused a lot of problems.
yes,
Kids learning to read only by, they're not reading, they're guessing. They're guessing
yeah.
words, and
It's
it's
the
not
sight words, right?
right. Yes. And
Yes,
so when we've had systems that have worked, once again, it's another thing that we've been gaslit in. So
yep,
the schools that excel keep phonics, and sometimes they keep phonics at a great risk.
yes.
They teach it anyways, but
Hmm.
and they're not supposed to, because a bunch of elected officials decided that, when I say decided, I usually mean, I'm guessing, I'm assuming this, but something has got to have come into to change their mind and to say, oh, let's trust the experts. We trust kind of like going back to the books, if I can,
Hmm.
going back to the books and saying, oh, we're only going to let experts decide what should be in our libraries. Well, when the experts are coming from the American Library Association, which openly on their own pages says that their goal is to push kids towards socialism,
Hmm.
then you're being gaslit when you go, I'd rather people who share my values, librarians who share my values,
Hmm.
or at least, and even if I don't have them, because like I don't, so even if I don't have a librarian that shares my values, I'd rather transparency. And they'll say, oh, well, we're not going to be transparent. And they say that on purpose. We will not be transparent because
Yeah.
that's not being kind and welcoming. Again, you are being
we're
you need
we're
to ask how kind you want
excluding
to be.
you because we like
Yes.
this person over here. Yeah, it's at its in its finest form. It and I Carrie, I just think it's such a big deal when we talk about books in libraries, but we're giving kids books that don't even have grammatically correct English in them. Have you
Right.
ever read Junie B. Jones? And then we gaslight families, rather, we gaslight families about academic competence, that your
Yeah.
child is going to develop great speaking skills. But if you don't have great reading skills and you're not reading high quality literature, you're not going to have great speaking skills. And when academic competence is not foundational to everyone's existence, not only do we not have self government, we cannot function when illiteracy is masked as equity. And I think that's deeply concerning because if no one can read, that's a problem. What else? Like if we go down our list here, institutional gaslighting looks like, and I'll just give you one. This curriculum is, quote, age appropriate, in my opinion. Doesn't matter what you think, but in my opinion, it's age appropriate. What's
Right.
another one that we might hear?
Well, when you use the term high
Yeah.
quality almost always means a social justice agenda, or
Yes.
it's some kind of theory, whether that's queer theory or critical race theory or whatever theory. That's what high quality means today, and people don't understand that. Really well meaning people, I need to give credit to the people who mean well but who
Hmm.
let the Trojan horses in, because
Yeah.
they also are, well, don't you want what's best for the kids? Well, who's choosing what's best for the kids? Because um like like a high quality daycare requires that you have gender closets. That's a fact. And
Hmm.
so another thing that is big, my favorite subject that I'm a little bit of an expert in is ethnic studies.
Yes.
Okay? Ethnic studies and quote unquote true history. Oh my gosh, take a look at Netflix and you will see what revisionist history is.
Hmm.
Did you know that Joan of Arc is darker than I am? No joke. That's the new Joan of Arc. And the same thing, King Edward is
Mm.
black, genderqueer, and in a wheelchair. Really? That's the way that worked.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of things that, and you're not allowed to question. Um, I got involved in all of this in Washington State right after right after the killing of Mr. George Floyd. And right
Oh,
after it,
okay.
within a day, that schools were sending out messages and they were saying, do not question. If you question, that proves your white supremacy. Okay, that was gaslighting. You are not allowed to
Absolutely.
question somebody's truth, no matter how beyond. And so all of a sudden, then these books came out. Well, because this is true, because this is true. Well, now your child needs all of this high quality literature so that they can learn to be, oh, my favorite, empathetic.
Well, it is important to talk about these things because the gaslighting that has come out of our educational institutions is so off the charts.
Yes.
It is abusive. It has abused children, it has abused parents, and it has abused the workplace in that space. Just as an example, when teachers or institutions say it's not ideological, it's just inclusion.
Right.
No. No.
Well,
When you
go ahead.
attack a certain faith tradition in the interest of inclusion, it is ideological.
Yes. Oh, very much so.
And so the idea that we are just doing this in the interest of helping everyone belong is not truthful, especially when you read the agenda documents. So, I really would love to talk about the political positions that are presented as like moral fact. You talked about ethnic studies, and
Well, I
let's
didn't
let's
quite.
go
Let me
there.
let me explain that little bit of ethnic studies. What people think ethnic studies is culture of the month club. They think, oh, I'm going to learn about Indians. I'm going to learn about African Americans, Indians, either Native Americans or people from India. That is not the goal. The goal is always two-part. And this is direct from Christine Sleater, who created the California model policy. I have quotes. I have went into a deep dive on this woman. And she says that ethnic studies, when guided by critical race theory, is the only correct direction. Else we risk being culture of the month club. So they intentionally mean that every child should see themselves as oppressed. First, are we seeing that or no?
Yes,
and the second
we
thing, and the second thing is that after they see themselves as oppressed, they should dismantle the systems of oppression. So I wonder if you walk out to these kids who are protesting and say, okay, you don't like capitalism, tomorrow we're taking away your dad's job. Goodbye, mom's job. You don't have those anymore.
Yeah.
Because they work for they make money working. So they work for a capitalist institution. It's got to go. I wonder how many kids would then still pick up their signs. But they don't understand where all of this leads, right?
Oh, no. Well, I don't think they're told that there's some sort of, dystopian utopia, right?
Yes. And
it's not coming. I hate to tell you, kids, it's not coming because the utopia you're talking about is Mouse China. And let's talk, Cari. In fact, let's talk about the ultimate gaslighting is that our children are going to save the world with these protests. What did Mao do to the kids after they were done being used as political pawns? Could you enlighten our viewers? What did they do?
Well, first off, these kids, while they were still there, they destroyed businesses. They destroyed their own families. They would say, I heard my mom say X, I heard my dad say this. And you can watch a video on YouTube of a older man talking about how he had his own mother executed. That's facts. Okay. So then once you've got this angry group of kids who only know how to react in anger and protest and resistance. Well, what do you do with them when you've created what you want, when you've won? You send them out to the fields. You send them out to farming land, and you have them do menial tasks like pick up rocks and buckets and carry them all the way up hills and then all the way down hills. And that's all that they're doing. They're literally, except that they've got their little red book. So they're still reading it, and they're still saying, oh, this is for the greater good. But they have become a useless class.
Yep.
And many of them die. Many of them starve. You want to talk, what I learned recently was Pol Pot in Cambodia. They would make them flip the soil so that nothing would grow. So they literally would and the people would they'd see carrots coming out of the ground, and they weren't allowed to eat them. And if they did eat them, they would be punished in front of everyone. Well, that's no different than if you stand up. You said something about going to the school board meetings. Yeah, that's a dumb thing. You go to the school board meetings and they look and they spot you out and they say, oh, that's the crazy one. And you have to live with that, and you make that choice. Do you live with that? So what I always tell people, if I can give a little plug,
Yeah.
as we look for like school district ambassadors, because I'm the state director of Moms for America, and
Mhm.
as we look for them, I always say never attend if you're attending on your own. You need at least 3 people for them to consider you valid. And at the same time, I mean, it's designed for them to look down on you and to let you know how little minuscule and what a nobody you
Mhm.
are, right?
Yeah.
But if you have at least 3 people, you have a group that someone, maybe it's one person on that board, maybe it's a couple. They might listen to you.
Yep.
But it's hard because yes,
Yeah.
you get the arrows. But if you
Mhm.
don't get the arrows, who gets them? Your children.
Yes. So I think that's been the greatest tragedy of our time is that because parents didn't go and do the work to stand up for their children, our children are taking the arrows as evidenced by these videos that they're new. I mean, you can't have a dissenting opinion in school or they're going to beat the living snot out of you.
Yes.
And because parents didn't stand up, children are taking the arrows. And when you do go to boards and then you're told your concerns are misinformation, I'm going to bring us back in. That's institutional gaslighting. And
Yes.
it is abusive. It's abusive to your child and it's abusive to a parent. And I think if we could go to like the difference between teaching history and training ideology, the difference between teaching compassion and forcing belief. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so teaching history. So with my high school class, I teach a critical thinking class,
Uh-huh.
and we are doing a deep dive into the civil rights movement
Mhm.
and learning what the civil rights movement was versus what we've been told it was. They're two very, very different things, right? But the way in which you teach it, as opposed to push an ideology, or as their instructor or teacher
Mhm.
saying exactly what I think, is you give them, and you give them a lot more than what I've seen in public schools. I do have a child in public school, and
Mhm.
what I've seen is one paragraph on Booker T. Washington and one on W.E.B. Du Bois, and tell me which one you side with. Well, that's
Well, and usually they're
okay.
not even true.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
they're definitely aligned to get somewhere.
Mhm.
Most things in our school are designed now to push social justice. There is math. There's a math program called, I wish my little teammate was on with me, but I believe it's Math for Reason or something like that. But the whole
No.
p- or is it Math in Action? Anyways, the whole point is to have generative conversations through math. It is ran by an LGBTQ, a gay man, and this is their focus: is how do we make quote unquote math relevant? How do we make history relevant? Well, the only way to make history relevant is if the kids see themselves in it. But see,
Yeah.
they're not seeing themselves in what we would call previously, and I still hold on to it, the hero's journey. You can't see that universal something. Instead, what you
Mhm.
see is it must be a person who looks like you. They don't have to think like you. They're just the stereotype of what you are, right? And so that becomes one, it makes, and I've seen this. I've seen especially Hispanic kids come up to me and go, I don't think the same way that my box has told me I have to think.
Ooh, isn't that so true? And I work in a school that um, about probably 8 years ago, there was a Latina woman who worked in this school and she took issue with the narrative. She was an immigrant from, I believe, Guatemala, had a great carriage. She was an extraordinary teacher. And we were in a staff meeting one day, and the narrative is that these young black and brown kids are not capable. We have to produce trauma informed instruction because of their generational trauma, and they give these things. And this lady, from another country, immigrant to the United States, um, very much so the adult version of what they were speaking of. And she said, I disagree with you. I don't think that. And when she said, I disagree with you, I think these kids are capable. They started calling her names, Spick, Oreo. I was like in this meeting, and these
Wow. Yeah.
we're public school educators, but because she dissented from the narrative, Now
Yes.
she's not Latina enough for the Latina crowd. It was a very interesting thing to watch, especially because I was a minority in the room. And
Oh
so
yeah.
to watch that dynamic go down was super, super interesting to me. And I think people need to understand how hard it is for teachers to stand up in spaces where the overwhelming ideology is forced upon you.
Right.
Yeah.
I call it the emperor's new clothes. And when I'm
Hmm.
teaching kids, it's the very first lesson, any class, any age, that I talk to the kids about the emperor's new clothes, because I want them to understand that it wasn't clothes, it was ideas. And so
Hmm.
he was open to grasping any kind of idea. But why would his servants take on those? Well, because one, there's security in taking those on. So
Hmm.
you have to come at these parents and teachers, unless they're the radicals, which I get the radicals a lot. They come after me and oh, my favorite, these people who are so kind and so compassionate. I'm very autodidactic. That means I'm self-taught, okay? And they will come after, and especially if people are listening to me, they'll go, I just can't take you seriously. Your punctuation and grammar is just whatever, right? And I respond, I'm a little snarky. I respond, oh, I'm so sorry, but I went to public school. I'm half black. Grew up in the foster system. Like, don't gaslight us that you're compassionate and kind when
Uh-huh.
the majority of kids today don't have the education that I got as a poor foster kid
Hmm.
aging out of the system. Somehow in the 90s, I got a better education than your woke, which is the only word for it, than your progressive social
Hmm.
justice education today. That somehow, when I was a kid, my teachers would say, okay, you've had it, you haven't, you didn't even stay in the same house for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
We're going to help you with your math. Now they'll just say,
Hmm.
oh, well, we can understand. We can understand. Let's fix that grade a little bit. So, and I've heard it. I've
Oh,
actually talked to teachers who've openly said, "How do I grade? How do I grade students without considering their race and their background?" And
well,
I'm
you
like,
can't, according to this new book study that schools are doing.
"What is that?" you bring the
Well,
you bring the
just in
receipts,
case you
Christina.
didn't know, you have to consider a child's skin color before you assess them. And if you don't, you have deeply rooted issues that you must work out. Um, yeah, it's
What's
called
it called?
grading for equity, what it is, why it matters, and how it transforms schools and classrooms. But the core pretense is that you always must consider skin color and race. Otherwise, you're not doing your job. And I don't know. Last I checked, I was assessing skill set because when you operate with the presupposition that the inherent equality of man cannot be understated, all men are created equal, right? And if you operate with that presupposition, then you're assessing skill set and you're just interfacing with a child and helping them learn in different ways and spaces that's best for them. But when you bring all those other things into it, it's not helpful, it's not fruitful, and it certainly doesn't raise the bar, it lowers the bar. Which I guess if we could go back to gaslighting, when we talk about, this idea that we have to have uneven inputs to produce even outputs. I don't know if anybody's ever really thought about that in its logical conclusion,
So
but
there's a few things on this, and I'm looking again at your notes, and it says, and eventually citizens doubt themselves. Well, eventually children doubt themselves. And
yes.
what I think is so important and such a disservice, and it is February, it's Black History Month. I'm not a
Hmm.
huge fan of those, but it crosses my mind more this month
Yeah.
just because, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how about the poor immigrant child
Hmm.
who has come here from another country,
Hmm.
who thrives academically? You're stealing from them. When
Yes.
you lower the bar to make everybody equitable, you're also stealing from those kids.
Yeah.
So you're
Educational theft is going to be
yeah.
the number one crime of our time, in my opinion. Whether it be the educational theft where we don't give children what they need because we're trying to produce some sort of equal outcome, or the misbehavior that is allowed to persist in our
Yeah.
classroom, stealing the education of other students. I think
Yep.
educational theft will end up being one of the biggest crimes of our time. I want to talk just a little bit about institutions blurring the lines between teaching compassion and enforcing belief. I think there's a difference,
Yeah.
especially when
sure.
it comes to the Christian and the Jewish and the Muslim traditions and the Latter day Saint tradition too. I think that when institutions blur those lines and then they shame parents for noticing,
Yeah.
that trust goes completely out the window. And to be honest, children, they absorb the confusion, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think that the number one issue in so much of what our state battles in terms of suicidal ideation is the fracturing of the core family beliefs when it's been attacked by the overriding ideological sequence, if you will, of the institutions that our children are in.
That was an awful lot. um, uh,
Sorry.
so what I would say is that I personally think that the constant focus
Mhm.
on mental health again robs our kids of the opportunity to enjoy school.
Yes.
So and then the mental health oftentimes through organizations that I don't support, like Safe Utah,
Mhm.
that would say, you know, who is your trusted person other than your parents to talk
Mhm.
to about
Yep.
problems.
Yeah.
So that breaks up the family. But really, and then the other thing is absolutely like schools, while no education is neutral, and I think that's important that everybody understands that.
Mhm.
Christians, religious people, if you're sending your children to school, you are sending them for a secular education. We aren't talking secular of the 90s and the early 2000s. We're
No.
talking social justice.
Yes.
That is the focus of education. So
Mhm.
once in a while, and I really, I mean, like I said, I have a son currently in public school. Once in a while, there are really, maybe not once in a while. In every school, there's probably some successful programs, but
Mhm.
there's definitely social justice being pushed. You
Oh yeah.
cannot have social and emotional learning, whatever you want to call it, in whatever brand you want to call it, and
Mhm.
not have social justice.
Yeah.
So the only thing, and I want to make one little caveat, I do know of character development that is your basic teaching kindergartners that you greet somebody by shaking hands and smiling, looking them in the eyes.
Oh.
That's character. That's very different than social and
Mhm.
emotional compliance, which is the state is God. If you can trace it back, as you say, to the logical conclusion, if
Mhm.
you go, is there anywhere where this is going to make my children believe that the state is the new God? We've got a problem. And I think there's very few places where that's not what's being taught from music programs and
Mhm.
songs that sing there are no fences and there were no borders at the beginning of time. You are pushing towards the state, you are pushing towards an ideology.
Mhm. Mhm.
Language arts programs that talk about how bad the police are, or
Mhm.
constantly are reading stories about how immigrants came and immigrants are better, and showing little vignettes of white people being racist.
Mhm.
Again, this stuff always has an agenda. The state
Yeah.
would do it better.
Yeah. And we don't want to turn government into a god because ultimately, is there anything that the government has ever not screwed up?
Yeah.
We've talked about literacy, we've talked about liberty. Let's talk about legacy. So if we think about institutional gaslighting and the policy shift that comes from that and the concerns raised by parents, and then officials will deny scope or intent, and then they label their critics as extreme despite the fact that they have evidence.
Right.
And then we come into this place where we see that gaslighting ultimately, and you see this all over Utah, when people are gaslit, accountability is delayed, and then students are harmed. We see this very authoritarian regime that's used in gaslighting, and we see it throughout history. I think that's the thing that people don't understand is that it's a historical thing. So Leninism, there were temporary measures for the people. In Bolshevism, it was they reframed dissent as counter-revolutionary, and they even went so far as to call it insane. In the Maoist movement, they redefined reality through the Frankensteinian language, through the revolutionary language, and so it's like they were using the same words but different dictionaries. Have you seen that lately? You think about
And Mao
Nazi.
Mao Mao can
Hmm.
Mao called the people who were against him rightists or far right.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think you can get more like
History always repeats itself, right?
right. Well, so what I always say is that history doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes. It sounds, and now it sounds an awful, awful lot like it did back then, right? More
Yeah.
so, one of the things that I will say I was really frustrated with was when the school board decided not to use the word Soviet, because that would have woken up so many. I'm not. I don't want to get into the the weeds of all
Nope,
that,
you
but
can go there because you know what I think about it. You can use the C word,
so
cowardice.
well, yeah. So for me, it was a matter of if you're on team parents, then you
Hmm.
help parents know what's going on. And
Yes.
I felt that this Soviet is exactly what's going on. When we have
Hmm.
programs that tell kids to turn each other in or to turn teachers in the name of helping them now, but
Yep.
it's the same system. And it
Yeah.
doesn't really help them when you're calling. And I have had parents who've done this. See, the
Hmm.
thing is that parents need a hero, and we shouldn't be in a place where parents need a hero.
Yeah.
We should be in a place where families just feel strong, and
Hmm.
instead they need a hero, so they send things to me. They, this is a part of the advocacy work that I do. People will send me things that they don't want to openly say because they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to
Hmm.
lose their standing or their friends. They don't want
Hmm.
to lose their reputation in their religious community.
Hmm.
And all of this is the exact same thing as it was in these Soviet places. People would, in hushed tones, tell each other the truth. And
Yep.
you had to be careful that while you told people the truth, somebody wasn't listening to demolish it. But I
Hmm.
can't help but feel that to it was a choice to not use the word Soviet tactics. And if your choice is, I don't want KSL to come after me, well, guess what? They're coming after you. We've
Yeah.
got socialist propaganda rags. They're
Hmm.
coming after you no matter what you say. If you breathe, they're coming after you. If
Hmm.
you don't if you don't carry the party line.
Yeah. Well, and it's the ultimate form of gaslighting when we say, well, we know that's true, but we don't want to use that language because it's divisive.
Yes. Yeah.
That is gaslighting. On its face, it's gaslighting. And I'm going to go back to the notes here because gaslighting precedes coercion.
Yeah.
And I think that what we see is that first, the people who are gaslighting will distort language, then they distort history, then they distort morality, and eventually what will happen, and we've seen it even in our lifetimes, is that citizens doubt themselves more than they doubt the state. And that's where we've got citizens who, when they doubt themselves, the government becomes a god. And so let's just go into a little bit of why this matters for American liberty. Because American liberty is built on natural rights, individual conscience, truth claims that are external to government. And gaslighting, especially from our institutions and our government and our politics and our politicians, really flips that. Truth becomes institutional, it becomes fluid, it becomes narrative and propaganda driven. And that's ultimately incompatible with liberty.
So the word that you're talking is liber, right? And liber means to be well educated. So an informed populace is the most important thing. Okay?
Yes.
When we are not allowed to question or point out when something's wrong, we cannot be informed.
No.
There are certain groups, community groups, that I'm not allowed to share things like events on because somebody will say that's offensive. And it's like, I'm inviting people to a fondue party. But they can say, let's do this whatever thing that could arguably considered, no kings, whatever. They can say whatever they want there. But liber means to be educated. It's library, books, educate, be well balanced in your ideas. So I honestly wouldn't have a problem if kids decided that they wanted to protest. If first they had to write a paper explaining the pros and cons of what they're protesting, explaining that they understand the other side. And I still would have a problem with it being done in school, for sure, because that's taxpayer money. But I wouldn't be so afraid, because then I would think that these kids are being taught to think. When education, and it has, and I have academic proof of this, when education says that students should be taught to lean into pathos and ignore logos, lean into emotion. Well, that's what gaslighting. When you have no sense of truth, then you're constantly going, oh, how do I feel? Do I feel safe? That's another huge gaslighting. Sorry to go all the way around, but
no,
huge here in Utah. Safe and safety culture. We do all of this to keep you safe. Really? And again, the kids aren't buying it.
No.
Some are. Well, and I would say the majority, because I've heard this from my own students, the majority of kids who are buying it are getting out of class.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a reason to avoid work. And I think that our children learn by watching adults. When they watch adults deny obvious reality, and when they watch other adults shame disagreement and abuse others or silence dissent, they learn that power defines truth. And that's not freedom. That's training in fear. And what did we see our students do this last week? We saw them instill fear in others.
Right.
And so it's super interesting. It also has great implication on our families and our faith. And we are a state that has a predominant faith. And we have to remember that families are the primary moral educators. It doesn't belong to the state. And I also think we need to remember with that when parents are derelict in their duty, someone else is going to pick that up. And when institutions contradict parents and call parents unstable, ignorant, or extremist, the child is ultimately placed in a space of divided loyalty.
Yes.
And that is so damaging to a child. Faith traditions teach that truth is not manufactured, that conscience matters, and that integrity requires alignment between word and reality. And gaslighting takes all three of those and it just beats them down. Let's talk about how to combat gaslighting, some tactical measures. So, for example, one of them is to demand transparency, demand primary source documentation. When you ask for things, make sure you ask for raw data, not summarized or aggregate data. Record meetings and compare statements over time. It's important. I think you can track language shifts in policy documents, protect whistleblowers, and separate disagreement from defamation. It's huge in this state. The gaslighting on that issue, like disagreement is framed as so many things in Utah, and it is one of the ultimate gaslighting techniques of politicians and of people in power. It's really unfortunate. Gaslighting thrives in vagueness. And so if you're taking a tactical approach to cut to the chase, right, and get back to the truth, clarity is where you want to be with very, very poignant things. What are some other tactical things people can do to combat the gaslighting that they experience?
Well, I love that you said clarity, because the antidote is not outrage. Being calm, cool, and collected. If you choose, like I said, if you choose to go to a school board meeting, go in numbers. The same thing if you choose to have a meeting with your elected official afterwards, ideally go with a friend. So just again, that keeps the clarity, it keeps the reasoning. If you decide that you want to I mean, you have to weigh the costs, right? So
Yeah.
even teachers have to weigh the cost. I don't want to teach this lesson. Well, it could cost you your job. You need to know that, right?
Yeah.
For parents, you need to weigh the cost. If you're afraid, then contact somebody like me. Contact a school district ambassador across the state, and just, take that picture, share that imagery. Not because we want to exploit. One thing that we feel strongly about is not intentionally naming names. We don't want to name and shame. One reason I don't want to name and shame, Christina, is like you said, you've been in trainings. Well, if you're a young teacher and you've been in trainings and this is all you've ever seen, of course you're going to believe what you're doing is right. I don't want to ruin your life. I want you to understand. And really, I do want you to understand that the person, but I do what I do so that the parents can protect their children. And that, I think, is vital. The most important thing that we can do is keep parents involved. And then that other thing that is so, so important, and it sometimes makes me emotional because we have such a lack of it, is courage.
Yes.
I feel like one thing that I personally do, because I am a Christian, and what I personally do is most nights I fall asleep listening to Proverbs, because it helps you have wisdom. And when you have wisdom, when you're rooted in that, you cannot be easily swayed. And so that's different than I feel this way, right? This is, I am applying wisdom here. Whether that wisdom is, I cannot get into it with this person because they're just not going to listen. There's no point. I need to just wipe the dust off and move on. Or whether it is, if I apply this tactic with these people, this is going to be effective. And that's the thing is look at what's going to be effective. Outrage isn't. Outrage is for that brief moment. Outrage catches that viral moment. And with that viral moment of 60,000 people seeing something, you're going to find 5 who wake up. And I think that's another really important thing, is to think of all of this as tossing back the starfish. That's all we're trying to do. We're not going to win in big numbers. Too many people have been manipulated.
Yeah.
But in small, Yeah, and be addicted to truth. Be committed to truth.
Oh, absolutely. Addicted to truth. You couldn't ask for something better. I think if we can, let's go to our closing thoughts here, because you said something that is so important, and so I'm going to repeat it. You said courage, and I would say that truth does not need volume. It needs courage. And then gaslighting is, gosh, it's not just annoying. And when you see gaslighting, boy, it is painful to be in that space, because when you're with a bully and you have to be statesmanlike, it is exhausting to constantly call out gaslighting in that space. But it's not just annoying rhetoric, it's civic corrosion. It destroys the conversation and the debate. I loved how you talked about clarity. Let's talk about what liberty requires and come in here to the end. Cari, tell us what liberty, literacy, and legacy require, please.
I mean, they all three require being well read. Really, ultimately, that's what it means. And reading the best books, reading true quality books. We can still get our hands on the same things that the founding fathers read. And I think that that's important. Can I just one more time really quickly? Moms for America does cottage meetings where we discuss all of this stuff. We dig deep into these subjects. And I think that that's important. If you want to pass on legacy, if you're worried that maybe our kids are forgetting what their culture is, I'm not talking whiteness. I'm talking grace, resilience, and grit. That's what our country comes from.
Yeah. But as we close, I'm just going to say that education forms habits, habits form citizens, citizens form nations. And what we tolerate in classrooms today becomes the civic reality of tomorrow. Liberty is sustained through literacy. Literacy is sustained through truth. And truth requires courage. Parents, do not outsource vigilance, and do not confuse noise for reform. Also, never underestimate the power of lawful structure. This work is long, but it is necessary. Cari, thank you for joining us. We will continue this conversation next week.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.